Just sign here, Mom. His voice was soft, gentle, practiced, but I heard something else. A tremble, a hesitation, a warning. I looked down at the paper in front of me. Thick, black ink. Legal words I didn't understand, my name already typed at the bottom. It's just a safety form, he added. He smiled, but the smile didn't touch his eyes. It never did anymore. I was sitting in the kitchen where sunlight once felt warm. Now it just exposed everything. The cracks in the tile, the dust along the windowsill, the silence. He sat across from me, my only son, David, the boy I raised on oatmeal and lullabies, the man who now wore suits and smelled like stress. He tapped the paper again. It's just to protect your name in case anything happens to the property. Property. Not home, not memories, not the place where his father built the bookshelves with his bare hands. Just property. I looked up at him. His eyes flicked to the clock. He was in a hurry. He always was these days. Can I read it first? I asked. He chuckled, low, dismissive. Of course, Mum, but it's just a standard form, nothing scary. He said scary like I was a child afraid of thunder, but I wasn't afraid. Not yet. Just unsure. The way your foot hovers over the first step of a dark basement. I picked up the paper. It was heavy in my hands. I read the first line. It made no sense. I tried the second. More of the same. Why is your name listed here? I asked. He smiled again. Just as a backup, to make sure we can manage it together. Together. But it didn't feel like together. It felt like alone. Me, at this table. Him, in his world. I stared at the pen next to the page. Blue. Smooth. Ready. He placed his hand on mine. You trust me, don't you? My heart paused. Do I? Did I? I remembered his first steps, his first heartbreak, the day he broke his arm and begged me not to let go. I'll never let you fall again, he had whispered. But that was a long time ago, before the long silences, before the rushed visits, before the woman in red heels started calling herself his priority. I put the pen down. I need to think. He sighed, deep, heavy. Of course. It's just, we have some deadlines. But take your time. Deadlines. That word didn't belong in my kitchen. It didn't belong next to the tea-stained doily on the table, or next to the fridge covered in faded magnets, or beside the scar on the cabinet where he once slammed a drawer in frustration at 16. He left shortly after, with a kiss on my forehead. A kiss that felt like punctuation, like a period, not a comma, not a pause, just an end. I stared at the paper, and I didn't move, not for hours, because something had shifted, something I couldn't name yet, but I could feel it, like the way the air changes before a storm, and I knew deep down this wasn't the end of something, it was the beginning. The next morning, I made tea, strong, bitter, no sugar. I wanted to feel the burn. I needed to stay awake, alert. The paper was still on the table, like a ghost, watching, waiting. I didn't touch it, not yet. I walked around it, paced the kitchen. The walls seemed to breathe. Or maybe I was holding my breath. I dialed my neighbor, Irene. She picked up on the second ring. Can you come over? Bring your glasses. She knew the tone. She came quickly. We sat together. She read, paused, read again. This isn't right, Margaret, she finally said. It's a transfer form. If you sign this, he owns the house, entirely. I stared at her. He said it was for safety. She shook her head. This is how people lose everything. My hands trembled. The paper fluttered. The kettle clicked off in the distance. But nothing felt warm anymore. Irene stayed with me. We talked. About lawyers. About power of attorney. About trust. About betrayal. Her voice was calm. Mine wasn't. I thought of calling him. David? But what would I say? You lied. You tricked me. He'd just call me confused, emotional, old, number I needed more. So I waited. I listened. I watched. 3 days passed. He didn't call, didn't ask about the papers, didn't check in. But his wife did. Vanessa, red lipstick, red nails, a smile like glass. She showed up without warning, holding a pie she didn't bake. Just checking in, she purred, but her eyes darted. To the table, to the paper, to my hands. You look tired, she said. Must be hard handling so much. Alone. I nodded. Let her speak. Let her fill the silence. Because when people talk too much, they always reveal more than they mean to. David works so hard, she continued. He just wants to keep things simple. Simple. Like selling the house out from under me? I smiled, tightly. Would you like some tea? Oh, no thanks. I can't stay long. Of course not. She never did. Just long enough to check the battlefield, to measure the damage. After she left, I went to the drawer, pulled out every file, every document, the deed, the will, bank statements. I spread them across the table. My hands moved fast. My heart beat faster. I wasn't going to let this go. I wasn't going to sign, but I was going to prepare. Because if he wanted a battle, he would get one. Not from the mother he remembered, but from the woman I had become. Quiet, sharp, ready. The wind had teeth that morning. It bit through the windows, rattled the frame, made the curtains shiver like they knew something I didn't. I stood in my slippers, clutching a folded sweater to my chest. And I remembered something. Not a moment, a sound, a scraping under the floorboards. It was years ago, before David moved out, before my husband passed, before I became small, back when I had secrets too. The attic stairs groaned under my weight. I counted each step like a prayer, not from fear, but from memory. The attic was dusty, cold, but untouched. And in the corner, right where I left it, was the rug. Faded, floral, frayed at the edges. I knelt beside it, pulled it back slowly. And there it was, the notch, the groove in the wood. I wedged the screwdriver under the board and lifted. It creaked open like it was waking from a dream. Inside was a metal box, black, unlabeled, heavy. I carried it down the stairs, felt the weight in my arms, felt the weight in my chest. I set it on the table, next to the paper David had left. 2 symbols of trust, one old, one broken. I unlocked the box. Inside, the original deed, my wedding ring, my husband's journal, 2 letters in my son's handwriting. A photo of us 3. Before the noise came, I unfolded the deed. It was still in my name. No co-owner, no joint, anything. My house, mine. I picked up the journal. My husband had been a quiet man, but his words were full of storms. On the first page, if anything happens to me, take care of her. She built this place more than I did. Tears stung, not from sadness, but recognition. I flipped to the back. Tucked inside was a check. From a life insurance payout I never cashed. Enough to matter, enough to fight. I reread the letters David wrote as a boy. I love you, Mommy. I'll always take care of you. The M in Mommy was backwards. The ink smudged. What happened to that boy? Where did he go? What replaced him? The doorbell rang. I jumped, closed the box, covered it with a towel. I opened the door. It wasn't David. It was a man in a charcoal suit, holding a briefcase. Mrs. Hartley? I nodded. I'm with Southway Realty. Your son asked me to take some preliminary photos of the house. The words hit like ice water. Photos? Yes, for listing purposes. He said you approved. I laughed. Sharp, cold. You have 10 seconds to get off my porch? He blinked, stammered, left. I closed the door with a force that shook the frame. So it begins. That night I didn't sleep. I sat with the box, with the journal, with the letters, and I made a list of what I had and what they didn't know I had. I wasn't going to lose my home, not to suits, not to deadlines, not to my own flesh and blood. If they wanted a war, I would give them one, but it would be quiet, precise, deadly, and they would never see it coming. The next morning, I woke up before the sun. The hallway was still dark, but my mind was already racing. I went to the kitchen, put on the kettle, watched the steam rise while my hands trembled. I wasn't scared. I was calculating. The house smelled like dust and silence, like years and promises, like my husband's cologne still trapped in the wood. And then the knock came. 3 short raps, too early for a visitor, too late to pretend I wasn't home. I opened the door. David. He stood there in his jacket, holding a box of donuts, fake smile plastered across his face. Behind him, her, Melissa, his wife, lipstick too red, smile too tight, eyes scanning my house like it was already hers. "Morning, Mum," David said. I stepped aside, wordless, heavy. They came in like they owned the place, set the box on the table, sat down in chairs they never paid for. We just wanted to stop by, have breakfast. Like old times. Melissa added sugar to her tea, 4 heaping spoonfuls, stirred it like she was stirring up my nerves. "We know things have been tense," David said. I sat, watched them, waited. Melissa leaned forward. "But we want to make this transition easy for you." There it was. "Transition?" She smiled. "You know, into assisted living." My jaw tightened. My fingers curled around my cup. "I'm not going anywhere." David's eyes flickered, nervous, caught off guard. "Mum, we thought—" "No," I said. "You didn't think. You assumed." Silence. The kettle clicked off. The room was suddenly too small, too hot. Melissa broke it. "You'd be happier. With people your age, no stairs, no stress." "You mean no claim, no obstacle?" David stood. "We're just trying to help." I stood too. Taller than I remembered being. Stronger. "I'm sure you are." I walked to the cabinet, pulled out the deed, dropped it on the table. Still mine. Melissa's face froze. David swallowed. "That changes nothing," she said. "It changes everything," I whispered. I opened the front door, held it wide. "Now please, take your donuts and go." They left in silence. But I knew it wouldn't be the end, just the beginning. After they left, the house was silent again, but not peaceful. Silence had a weight now, a shape. It followed me through every room. Their voices still echoed, that sugary tone of Melissa, the soft pleading in David's eyes. I didn't cry, not yet. Instead, I moved, like clockwork. I checked the locks, all of them. Then I went to the basement. It had been years since I was down there. The light bulb at the top of the stairs flickered. I took a deep breath and stepped down. Cobwebs greeted me like old friends. So did the smell, musty, still, unchanged. I pulled the string. A single bulb buzzed to life. The room blinked awake. There was a cabinet in the far corner, behind the water heater. I reached for it. Its door groaned open. Inside, files, paperwork, tax records. And at the very back, my favourite photo of us. David as a baby, in my arms, eyes wide. Like the world hadn't taught him yet. I touched the frame. It was dusty, like everything else. Dust never lies. It shows what's been forgotten, what's been abandoned. Like me. I spent the rest of the day cleaning. Not because the house needed it, but because I needed control. Scrubbing baseboards, wiping the kitchen cabinets, rearranging the pantry. I found my rhythm again, a rhythm no one could take from me. At sunset, I sat on the porch, watched the sky turn blood orange. The wind had shifted, and so had I. The next morning, I got a phone call. Blocked number. I let it go to voicemail. An hour later, the doorbell rang. Again. This time, I looked through the peephole. A different man. Slick hair. White teeth. Folder in hand. I opened the door a crack. Mrs. Hartley, I represent Havenbrook Estates. Your son referred us about your property. We're willing to offer above market. I didn't let him finish. Tell David I'm not selling. And if another stranger comes to this door, I'm calling the police. I slammed it. My hand shook as I locked it. Every bolt. I leaned my back against the door, exhaled slowly. They were getting desperate. That evening, I wrote a letter. To David. I didn't send it. Not yet. I needed him to read it one day. When the noise settled, when the dust cleared. Dear David, once you called me your hero. When you were small. Do you remember that? I patched your scraped knees. I held you through nightmares. I sold my wedding ring once to pay for your school trip. You said I was the strongest person you knew. Now you want to sell the roof that kept you safe, the walls that saw your first steps. All for what? A kitchen island? A new car? Melissa's approval? This house has bones, memories. It has me. But if you take it, you lose me too. Love, Mom. I folded the letter, tucked it inside the box, with the others. My hand hovered over the phone. I thought about calling him, about screaming, about crying. But no, not yet. Instead, I made another list. Contact lawyer, pull insurance records, lock shed hide originals if they wanted to play games. I had more pieces than they thought. I went to bed late. The wind had picked up again. But this time, it didn't scare me. Because I had the truth. And dust never lies. It was still dark when I woke. A chill in the air. A silence too pure. The kind of silence that feels wrong. Like something is holding its breath. I sat up in bed. My feet touched the cold floor. The dream lingered. David was small again. 4 years old. He had asked me if monsters were real. I had told him, only if you forget who you are. But in the dream, I had forgotten, and the monster had his face. I made tea slowly, watched the water boil, watched steam curl into the morning. The house creaked, settled. Like it too, was waking up uneasy. I opened the back door. The air was damp, like the world had wept overnight. The grass shimmered, but the garden looked tired, like it missed being loved. I used to prune the rose bushes every Sunday. Frank used to joke I loved them more than him. He wasn't entirely wrong. I stepped onto the porch, closed my eyes, let the wind touch my face. Then I opened them and saw the car, parked down the street. Same car as yesterday, watching, waiting. By noon, I couldn't sit still. I vacuumed the hallways, wiped the windows, polished the wood. The photos stared back at me. Me and Frank in Paris, David's graduation. Christmas, 1989. The year everything still made sense. But something else caught my eye. A small crack under the living room window. It hadn't been there before. I got down on my knees, ran my fingers over it. Thin, hairline, but real. Like the house was beginning to split too. In the attic, I found the journals, boxes of them. I used to write everything down. Every dollar spent, every gift given, every time I held my breath. I flipped through one. Summer of '94. David had broken his arm. I slept beside him on the floor for a week. Another journal. Fall of 2002. Frank had lost his job. I worked nights at the bakery to make up the difference. A third one. Winter of '09. David borrowed money to move in with Melissa. Never paid it back. I closed the book, set it aside. Truth had weight. So did memory. I made copies of everything. Scanned the journals. Stored them on 3 flash drives. One for the bank box. One for the lawyer. One hidden in the pantry. Because forgetting is easy. But I was done being easy to forget. Around 4 p.m., I heard the gate. Footsteps. Familiar ones. David. I didn't move, didn't greet him. Let him knock. Let him feel that silence. Eventually, I opened the door. Only a crack. His face was red, frustrated, but trying to look calm. "Mum, why haven't you answered my calls?" "I've been busy." "Busy doing what?" "Living." He blinked. Didn't expect that. "I just want to talk," he said. "Then talk." He hesitated, glanced behind him. Melissa's car, engine running. I didn't mean for things to get messy. I said nothing. Just looked at him, looked through him. I was just trying to do what's best. For who? He stopped. That pause told me everything. After he left, I found the old guest room key, locked the door. Inside that room was everything Melissa hated. Doilies, yellow walls, Frank's old recliner. It would become my war room. I pulled out folders, financial records, estate plans, property titles. One sheet caught my eye. Frank's will. His signature at the bottom. Still strong. Still permanent. He had written a note at the end. "To my beloved wife, this house is yours, forever." I traced the ink with my finger. Let myself cry this time. But only for a moment. Then I picked up my pen and started making calls. Because the storm was here, and I had finally stopped hiding from it. The next morning started with silence. Not the peaceful kind, but the kind that rattles, the kind that hums just under your skin. I made coffee. Black. Didn't bother with sugar. Didn't bother with anything sweet anymore. The table was empty, except for the old envelope. Still sealed. Still waiting. I slid it aside. Not yet. I stepped outside. The garden needed tending. The soil had cracked in the sun. And somehow, I knew exactly how it felt. My knees popped as I bent down. The roses had overgrown. Thorns were wild, colourful chaos. But they were still mine. I trimmed the dead heads, ripped out the rot, let the sweat sting my neck. Because work makes sense when people don't. Inside, I dug through drawers. Every drawer. I wanted every document, every note, every truth. The birth certificate, the deed, the marriage license, even the letter David wrote to Santa when he was 7. All of it. I needed to remember. I needed to be reminded why I still cared, and why I needed to stop. Melissa called. 3 times. I let it ring. Then I turned the phone off. A message buzzed through anyway. A single line. "We can still fix this." Fix what? The betrayal? The lies? The way she looked at me like I was in the way? There were some things you don't unsee, don't unhear. Like her laughing in my kitchen, talking about renovations, while I was still grieving, still bleeding. I went to the attic again, this time for the chest, the one Frank built. Cedar, sturdy, smelled like time. Inside it, photos, letters, a box of clippings, my life in fragments. I pulled out one photo, David on my lap, 4 years old, laughing, covered in cake. That boy is gone now. But I still remember how he smelled, like soap and milk. And I remember how he used to say, "Don't worry, Mama. I'll take care of you forever." Forever didn't last long. Evening came heavy. The wind picked up. The lights flickered. The house groaned like it remembered something too. I stood by the mirror in the hallway, looked at myself. really looked, there she was, an old woman, grey hair, tired eyes, but not broken, not yet. I opened the envelope, the one I'd been avoiding. Inside, a letter, typed, cold. David's lawyer, claiming power of attorney, claiming I was unfit, claiming this house was now his. I read it once, twice, didn't cry, didn't scream, just folded it back and smiled, because I had made my own copies, and mine told a different story. That night, I didn't sleep. Instead, I wrote every thought, every wound, every word I hadn't said. I wrote until the birds started singing, until my hand cramped, until I knew exactly who I was again. I wasn't just a woman. I wasn't just a widow. I wasn't just a mother. I was Margaret Hill, and I was still standing. And they were about to find out just how loud silence can scream. The wind screamed all night, like it knew, like the house wanted to warn me. But I didn't sleep. I watched the shadows move across the ceiling. Each one felt like a memory trying to leave me. But I wouldn't let them. Not yet. By morning, the walls felt closer. The air was thick, and something inside me had shifted. This wasn't grief anymore. It was rage, sharp, clear, alive. I made oatmeal, because that's what Frank would have done. Simple, hot, grounding. I sat at the table and placed the legal letter in front of me. Flat, unmoving, but not untouched. I pulled out a pen, and on the back of that letter, I started my plan. No more waiting. No more wondering what they'd take next. I called Elaine, my oldest friend, my fiercest ally. She picked up on the second ring. Margaret? Her voice was warm, worried. I need a lawyer. I didn't explain. She didn't ask. She just gave me a name and an address. Tell him I sent you. He'll listen. That afternoon, I found my old purse, the one Frank bought me in '89, tattered, stubborn, like me. I slipped on my coat, put on lipstick, and walked out the door. Let them see me. Let them whisper. Let them know something had changed, because I wasn't hiding anymore. The office smelled like leather and ink. The lawyer, Mr. Conway, was young, but his eyes were tired. He'd seen battles before. I want to fight, I said. He studied me, then nodded. Let's begin. I handed him everything, copies, originals, photos, receipts, even the note Frank left me in the garden shed, the one that proved we'd never signed anything over. His brows lifted, his pen scratched. We have a case, he said. And I didn't realize until then how much I needed to hear that. I walked home slower, not because I was tired, but because the world felt different, lighter, sharper, more mine. When I reached the gate, Melissa was there, leaning against her car, phone in hand, fake smile in place. I've been calling, she said. I know. We need to talk. No, I replied. We really don't. She blinked. That smile cracked just slightly. You're making this harder than it needs to be. And you made it personal when you lied. I didn't wait for her response. I walked past, straight into the house, closed the door behind me, locked it. The silence returned, but it wasn't empty. It was mine. I lit a candle, sat down in my chair, and looked around. This house had been built with love, brick by brick, memory by memory, and they thought a signature would erase that. They didn't understand what they were up against, because I was done playing nice. That night, I burned the lawyer's letter in the fireplace, watched it curl into ash. Then I turned to Frank's journal, the one I'd never dared read. Page 1. If you're reading this, then you're braver than I was. And suddenly I wasn't afraid anymore. I found it by accident. A ledger, old, bound in cracked leather, tucked behind the fuse box in the basement. The moment my fingers touched it, I knew it had weight, not just in pages, but in meaning. It wasn't Frank's handwriting, not at first, but by page 17, it was unmistakable, and he'd written things I never knew. He knew about the second mortgage. He knew about the pressure from Melissa's side of the family. He suspected Daniel was being manipulated, but he'd never said a word. Instead, he documented it. Every meeting, every whisper, every check written under false pretenses. He even wrote a letter. To Margaret, if it ever comes to this. I couldn't breathe reading it, because he knew. He knew they'd try to steal what we built, and he left me tools, not money, not weapons, proof. I scanned every page, uploaded them all, printed backups. Then I called Mr. Conway. "We've got ammunition," I told him. He didn't ask how. He just said, "Good." And I could hear the click of his pen, the machine roaring to life. 2 days later, Daniel came by, alone, no Melissa. He brought tulips, the kind I planted every spring. I didn't let him inside. We stood on the porch, the same spot where he first learned to ride a bike, where I kissed his scraped knees. "I just wanted to talk," he said. I folded my arms. "Talk?" He looked down. "I didn't know about the paperwork." "That's funny," I said, "because your signature's on it." He flinched, and I didn't hide it. The pain, the disgust, the ache. "Mum," he said quietly, "they said it was a formality. They said—" "They?" I cut in. He didn't answer. I stepped forward, held the tulips, then dropped them, right at his feet. "You stopped being my son the moment you sold my roof out from under me." He didn't reply. He turned, got in the car, and left. But his eyes didn't look sure anymore. I stood in that doorway for a long time, watching the wind pull at the tulips, tearing their petals away, letting things die so new things could grow. And inside, I turned the page in Frank's ledger. To the last thing he ever wrote, "She'll outlast them all." Because her love was never weak. It was quiet, and it waited. But now, it's done waiting. The town was quieter than I remembered, or maybe I had just gotten louder inside. Either way, the silence didn't comfort me anymore. I walked into the courthouse like it was a battlefield, because it was, and I was no longer afraid of war. Mr. Conway met me at the entrance. He had 2 folders in his hand, one labelled Evidence, the other Legacy. "This is going to stir things up," he said. "Let it," I answered. We filed the injunction that morning. Daniel and Melissa were officially served by noon. They had 30 days to respond, or lose the house they'd tried to steal. The filing made the local paper. Front page, big bold letters. "Widow takes stand in property dispute with son." I wasn't hiding anymore. They wanted a spectacle? Fine, I'd give them one. Melissa's mother called me that afternoon. I let it ring. 5 times. 6. Then silence. Then again. And again. I finally picked up on the 9th ring. "Margaret," she snapped, "what do you think you're doing?" "Taking back what's mine." "You're embarrassing, Daniel. The community is talking." "Good," I said, and hung up. Daniel came by the next day. He didn't ring the bell, just stood on the edge of the property, looking like a man who'd lost something, but didn't know what it was. "I didn't know it would go this far," he said. "It didn't have to," I replied. Melissa wasn't with him, but I saw her car drive by, twice, watching, waiting, for me to fold. I wouldn't. Frank's ledger wasn't just a record, it was a map, and I followed it, each meeting, each notarized copy, each betrayal logged like a wound. We used it all. Mr. Conway built a case that not only protected my home, but put their intentions on display. Fraud, coercion, manipulation, all outlined, all signed. Melissa's signature was all over it, and Daniel's, his name was scrawled like a ghost, like he hadn't known what he was doing. But ignorance doesn't excuse theft. The hearing was set, 2 weeks away. I spent those days cleaning the house, polishing every photo, opening every curtain, letting the light in. Neighbours dropped off pies, casseroles, hugs. "You're brave," they said. "I just miss being respected," I answered. I found a photo of Daniel, 6 years old, holding up a frog like it was a trophy. I stared at it for an hour. My chest hurt. But not from anger, from grief. Grief for the boy he used to be. Grief for the woman who raised him right. Grief for the space between those two people. 2 nights before the court date, Melissa tried to call again, then texted, "This can all go away. Just sign the transfer. No hard feelings." I didn't reply. I just stared at the screen, until it dimmed itself, letting her words fade into darkness. That night, I dreamt of Frank. He stood in the kitchen, pouring coffee, wearing that silly checkered robe. "You've always had a backbone," he said. "I'm tired," I told him. "But you're not done." He smiled, then faded, and I woke up with tears in my eyes. The morning of the hearing, I wore blue. Frank always said it made my eyes sharper. I sat in the courtroom, across from Daniel and Melissa. She was in beige. He didn't look at me, but when the judge read the list of documents, their faces dropped. The ledger, the recordings, the bank statements. They weren't ready. They thought I'd break. But I wasn't glass. I was granite. And they had tried to carve me with lies. Mr. Conway stood, read Frank's final letter out loud. The courtroom was silent. Not a cough. Not a whisper. Just words. Honest. Sharp. Unforgiving. And when he finished, the judge looked at me, then at them, and she said, "Why did you think she wouldn't fight back?" Melissa stammered. Daniel looked like a child again. But me? I just sat, hands folded, heart steady, because the ink was dry. And my home? It was never theirs. It was written in stone. The courthouse doors closed behind me. But the echoes came home with me. Voices from the courtroom. The clink of Frank's wedding ring against a coffee mug in my dream. The silence of Daniel's eyes when he couldn't meet mine. I had won the day, but not the war. The house felt colder that night, even with the windows shut, even with the heater humming. I sat in Frank's chair again, the one with the sunken armrest and tea-stained fabric. The one Melissa always said was too ugly for company. I let my body sink into it. I let the house breathe around me. Then I opened the envelope. Not the court one, the one Frank had tucked into his ledger, labelled in his sharp handwriting, "For Margaret. If they ever come for it." Inside was a map, not literal, but made of moments, photos, notes, legal receipts I had never seen, and a letter, just for me. "My love," it began. "If you're reading this, you've already been braver than most people ever are." I read the whole thing aloud, as if he were in the chair across from me, and when I finished, I whispered, "I'm not done yet." 2 days later, Daniel sent me flowers, peonies, my least favourite. The card read, "Let's talk." So I invited him to lunch. He arrived alone, sweating, fidgeting. He looked like a boy wearing a man's skin. "I didn't mean for it to be like this," he said. "But it is like this," I replied. He stared down at his hands. "I wanted you safe," he said. I laughed once, sharp. "Safe from what, Daniel?" "From me." He tried to bring up forgiveness, but he hadn't asked for it. He tried to bring up family, but he hadn't acted like it. I told him, repentance without change is manipulation. He went quiet, and then asked, "What happens now?" I said, "That depends on your wife." Melissa didn't come by, but her lawyer did. Slick suit, sharp shoes, cold eyes. He wanted to settle. He said they'd give me the house if I signed a non-disclosure agreement. No public statements, no interviews, no memoir. I smiled and said, "You think this was about a house?" He blinked, confused. It was never just about bricks and wood. It was about me, about what they tried to erase. I stood, offered him tea. He declined and left. That night, I called the local college. I asked about volunteer programs, about women's shelters, about housing rights workshops. I wasn't going to disappear. I was going to amplify. Let them hear my voice where they once tried to shut it down. The news caught on. They wanted interviews, photos. One even called me the widowed warrior. Frank would have rolled his eyes, then secretly framed it. I accepted one interview. Just one. I wore blue, sat tall, and told them everything. When the camera cut, the reporter leaned over and said, "My mother's going through something similar. You just gave her courage." I smiled, and this time it reached my eyes. Daniel hasn't called again, not since lunch. Melissa posted something online about toxic relatives. I didn't reply, because truth doesn't need defense. It just needs light. And Frank? He would have been proud. Not because I fought, but because I finished it. But it wasn't the end. Just the next chapter. The mail came just after sunrise. A soft thud on the porch. I wasn't expecting anything, but there it was. A single envelope, no return address. Handwritten. Just one word. Margaret. I held it for a long time. It felt heavier than it should have, like the paper was soaked with meaning. Inside, a letter, written by a woman I'd never met, but who knew everything about me. She wrote about her mother, about watching her be erased in her own home. She wrote about seeing my interview, about the blue blouse I wore, the way I sat like I owned the truth. She said, "You reminded me of what strength looks like. You reminded me that I'm not crazy." I sat down on the floor, right there by the door, and cried. Not because I was sad, but because I realized I hadn't just survived. I had reached someone. I wrote her back, a full 3 pages, no holding back. And that day I started something new. I called it The Second Voice, a newsletter for women like her, for women like me, for those whose names never made it onto deeds or headlines. I wrote like I was still sitting in Frank's chair, with the ledger on my lap, with the weight of history in my hands. Then came the letters, dozens, then hundreds. Women who had lost their homes, their sons, their dignity. Each one wrote the same thing. I thought I was alone. I knew what that felt like, to sit in your own home and feel like a guest, to shrink yourself so others could expand. No more. A local radio station called, then a college, then a publisher. I turned down most offers. But I said yes to one event, a panel on elder rights. I wore Frank's pin, the gold one shaped like a key. I stood at the podium, looked out at the crowd, and said, "I was invisible once, but now I hold the light." They stood and clapped. But it wasn't applause I heard. It was Frank, whispering, "Told you so." Melissa sent a cease and desist, accused me of defamation. My lawyer laughed. "Let her try," he said. Daniel sent another bouquet. Roses this time. Red. I didn't open the card. I placed them in the garden, let them dry out in the sun. One morning, I woke up early. The house was quiet. the kind of quiet that feels earned. I walked room to room, touched every windowsill, every corner. I was home, and for the first time in years, it felt like mine. Not because of the deed, not because of the law, but because I had fought for it, and because I had claimed something far greater: my voice, my truth, my story. It came wrapped in fake warmth, a white envelope tucked in my mailbox. No handwriting this time. Typed. Cold. Precise. Inside. Join us for dinner. Friday, 7 p.m. We'd love to reconnect. Signed, Melissa and Daniel. My first reaction? Laughter. Not the joyful kind. The bitter kind that breaks from your chest like a cough. I set the letter down, poured myself tea, and stared at it for an hour. Then I folded it once, twice, tucked it under the edge of the cutting board. I needed time to think. Friday came fast. The sky was pale grey, a drizzle that felt like judgment. I wore black slacks. A sweater, Frank once said, made my eyes look like sea glass. I left my pearls in the drawer. Didn't feel right to wear armour. Melissa greeted me at the door. Her smile was painted on, like a mask she hadn't removed in days. Daniel stood behind her, his face unreadable. He looked tired, older than I remembered. "Come in," she said. Her voice was syrupy, but there was poison underneath. The table was set for 3. Candles, linen napkins, roasted chicken that smelled too perfect. We made small talk. I asked about work. Melissa answered for both of them. Daniel barely spoke. When he did, his words were clipped, tense. Then the real reason came. "We wanted to talk about closure," Melissa said. I paused, felt my fork tighten in my hand. "Closure?" I echoed. She nodded, eyes wide, fake sympathy pouring from every pore. "We know it's been hard, for all of us, but it's time to let go of the past, to sign things over, officially." There it was. The offer wrapped in concern, but built on greed. Daniel didn't look up. He just stared at his plate. I folded my napkin, set it on the table, and looked Melissa in the eye. "Do you think I'm stupid?" I asked. Her smile cracked, just a hair. "I've read every document, every line. I know what you're trying to do." Daniel's head jerked up. He looked at me, really looked. Melissa started to speak, but I raised my hand. "No more lies," I said. The room fell silent, just the sound of the rain tapping the windows. I came here tonight to see if there was anything left worth saving. A family, a memory, even a scrap of decency. I stood, picked up my coat. "But you didn't invite me to reconnect. You invited me to surrender." I walked to the door, opened it. The wind hit me like a warning. "I won't be part of your games anymore," I said. And I left, without looking back. Back home, I poured myself another cup of tea, sat by the window, and watched the rain. It didn't wash anything away, but it made things clear. I wasn't alone anymore. I had my truth. I had the voices of other women behind me, and I had the will to keep going. Melissa could file 100 more letters. Daniel could stay silent. But I had found something better than justice. I had found peace. 3 days passed. 3 whole days without a word from Daniel. Not even a text. I wasn't surprised. I wasn't hurt. I was finished expecting anything from him. But I wasn't done fighting. That morning, I dressed early. Put on the wool coat with the silver buttons. The one Frank always said made me look like I was going to win a battle. Because I was. I grabbed the file folder, thick now with letters, receipts, printouts, photographs, and one bright red legal envelope, the one they sent me. I headed into town, met with Elaine, my lawyer. She'd been my neighbour once. Now she was the only one who spoke to me like I still mattered. She reviewed everything carefully, silently, eyes scanning like a hawk. When she was done, she looked up and said, "They're bluffing." I nodded, felt something settle in me, a foundation pouring. "They're hoping intimidation will get you to walk away, but you're not walking." "I'm not," I said. Elaine smiled, leaned forward. "And if they push harder?" I slid the red envelope across the table. "My turn to push back?" The next morning, I drove to the house. My house. The place looked quiet. Melissa's SUV wasn't in the drive. Daniel's car sat crooked in front of the porch. I had my keys in hand. I walked up to the door, slipped the key in, turned. Nothing. I tried again. Still nothing. My hand froze on the knob. They changed the locks. I stood there for a full minute. Let the cold wind bite my cheeks. Let the silence fill me. Then I pulled out my phone, took a photo. One of the door, one of the lock, one of the front of the house. Documentation for Elaine. Then I rang the doorbell, waited. No answer. I didn't leave. I sat on the porch, crossed my legs, pulled my coat tighter, and waited. An hour passed. 2. Then the door opened. Melissa, hair messy, eyes sharp. "Why are you here?" she asked. "This is my house," I said. "Not anymore." "Changing locks doesn't change deeds," I said calmly. She smirked. "You'll lose everything trying to fight us." "Then I'll lose with a spine." I stood, turned away, walked down the steps, but not before slipping a letter into the mailbox. From Elaine. Certified. Stamped. Folded with facts and fire. By the time she opened it, I'd be back in town, preparing, because the next move was mine. The day of the court hearing felt like winter had settled in my bones, even though it was sunny, even though the sky was a perfect pale blue. I sat in the back seat of Elaine's car, hands folded over my purse, fingernails pressing into the leather. "Breathe," Elaine whispered. I did. Slow, deliberate. But the ache didn't leave. This wasn't just about a house. This was about dignity. And they tried to steal mine. We arrived early, sat on the stone benches outside the courtroom. Elaine reviewed her notes. I reviewed my memories. Of Frank sanding the window trim in that house. Of Daniel learning to ride his bike in the driveway. Of Christmases where the tree touched the ceiling. Melissa arrived 10 minutes before the hearing, draped in camel wool and entitlement. Daniel followed behind, eyes down, shoulders slumped. He looked like a man without a country, because he was. He gave up his homeland when he betrayed his mother. The judge's chamber wasn't grand. Wood-panelled walls, a soft ticking clock, a long table. They sat across from us. No one spoke at first, just the sound of papers being shuffled. Then the judge entered. She was small, sharp-eyed, looked at all of us like we were a puzzle. Elaine stood, presented the documents, the will, the deed, the evidence, everything. Melissa tried to interrupt, tried to frame it as a miscommunication. The judge raised one eyebrow, and silence swallowed the room. It didn't take long. The truth was simple, cold, clear, legal. The house was mine. I watched Melissa's face drain of color, watched Daniel blink like someone waking from anesthesia. "You may wish to discuss how you want to proceed outside of court," the judge said. "But the matter of ownership is settled." Settled. That word felt like sunrise. Outside the courthouse, Melissa stormed off, heels cracking against the pavement. Daniel remained, hands in his pockets. "I didn't want this," he said, voice soft, like that boy again. "You did nothing to stop it," I replied. He looked at me, eyes filled with something close to tears. "I was scared," he whispered. So was I said. But I stood up. He nodded, didn't apologize, didn't beg, just stood, and watched me walk away. Back at the house, the sun cut through the curtains. I opened every window, let the wind return. Then I brewed tea, sat at the kitchen table, and wrote a letter. To myself. I wrote what I'd survived, what I'd learned, what I'd never allow again. And then I wrote one more letter, to a women's shelter. The same one that helped my sister 30 years ago. I donated the other property, the one Frank and I bought but never fixed up. I gave it away, not out of bitterness, out of clarity. Melissa wanted a house, I built a home. And now, I was finally free. That night, I lit a candle, not for mourning, but for light. Because home isn't bricks, it's boundaries. And I'd finally drawn mine. The story ends here. But my life, it begins again tomorrow.